Welcome to the Creative Life Story Work podcast, where we explore how a creative approach to life story work can help children and young people who are in care make sense of their past and build a brighter future. A new model for life story work is being rolled out in the northeast of England, and this podcast shares the latest learning and investigates how it could help improve the lives of care-experienced children and young people across the country. My name is Dawn Williams and I am an associate at Blue Cabin, one of the partners on this exciting work in the region. Today, we get the chance to explore how regional organisations are supporting the voices of care-experienced young people in the telling of their stories. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to our podcast studio two allies and friends of Blue Cabin who both have connections to the northeast and who have both stepped into new roles in the city of Leeds. So a new chapter and new beginnings for both of our guests today. I'd really like to warmly welcome Dr Delyth Edwards, who is a lecturer in inclusion, childhood and youth in the School of Education in the University of Leeds, and Elvie Thompson, lead learning producer at the British Library in Leeds. Welcome to both of you to the podcast studio this morning.
Thank you, Dawn.
Hi, thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. Lovely to have both of you here. Delyth, I wonder if we could start with you. So I was trying to remember, I couldn't remember what the year was, but I think you were research associate, maybe, Leicester University. We met in Bensham, marvellously the home of Blue Cabin, when you were looking at understanding everyday participation and articulating what that meant to young people. I wondered if you, to start us off, would like to tell us a bit about your new role at University of Leeds and maybe also how you know Blue Cabin. What is it you've been doing with us?
Yeah, okay. So, as Dawn said, I've recently moved to the city of Leeds, working at the University of Leeds, which is actually really exciting because Leeds is a child-friendly city. And I'm just finding out about all the marvellous things that happen in this city. So for me, for somebody who teaches childhood and youth, who works in the field of childhood and youth, it's really exciting for me to be working in this city now. But yes, I suppose how I know Blue Cabin is exactly through my understanding, my role as a postgraduate researcher in the Understanding Everyday Participation project, which was an Arts and Humanities Research Council funded project in Gateshead. As you know, Dawn, we were looking at the everyday participation of young girls growing up in foster care. But we were doing other pieces of work and we were trying to find out what participation looked like in the northeast, particularly in Gateshead. So this is how I met Dawn, this is how I came to know Blue Cabin, and then a couple of years down the line I came across the wonderful work that Blue Cabin was doing around life story work, and then I was very happily and thankfully asked to be a part of two projects that were being commissioned by South Tyneside Council and funded by the Department for Education. And these were about time together. So we were looking at the experiences of family time that young people in care have with their birth families during COVID, and also looking at children in care councils. So that's how I came to work with and be an ally of Blue Cabin. In my role at university, so I'm a lecturer, so I teach childhood and youth to mostly master's students, and what's really wonderful is that my students, the majority of my students, 95% of my students are international, so they come from all over the world, and I get to talk to them about the projects that I've done with Blue Cabin. I've shown them the Blue Cabin website. We talk about life story work, so I've just taught them about care experience as a childhood experience. And the thing about care experience, it's a social fact. Every community on the planet has some form of care experience. So I've been talking about care experience in the UK because that's my area of expertise. But I've also been learning from my Chinese students, for example, about children left behind, which is a form of kinship care. So there's kind of like a dialogue between the two of us, me and my students. So that's really exciting.
That's really lovely to hear you using the Blue Cabin website as a provocation for your students from the UK and international as well. I hadn't realised that. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. And I shared the blog that I've just written for the Blue Cabin Creative Life Story Work, and I've had so many of the students come and ask me questions about life story work. Could it be used for these other groups from the country that I'm from? And I'm like, absolutely. So it's raising awareness amongst our international students, one, about care experience and what that means, and also of life story work.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Fantastic. Elvie, really interested to hear about your role at the British Library, and also any connections that you have with Blue Cabin would be lovely to hear as well.
Sure. Maybe I'll answer the second part first.
Yes.
My previous role before I worked for the British Library, I worked for Culture Bridge North East, in the North East, making connections between the arts sector and the education sector, and anywhere where there are children and young people. I had the great delight of having some funding to distribute as part of that role, and distributed some of it to Blue Cabin to support the creative life story work, which one of the things that I was very proud of and happy about in that job. And I guess that was how I got to know Blue Cabin. Yeah, one of the best funding applications I've ever seen. It was a very easy decision to hand over some cash, and I was and remain really inspired by the work that Blue Cabin does.
Thank you.
So my absolute pleasure. So having moved on from Culture Bridge North East a couple of years ago now, at the start of 2020, that I started working for the British Library in Leeds. So of course the British Library is the National Library of the UK, but we've actually got a really long history in Leeds itself. We've been there our whole life, it's our 50th birthday this year, and it's 50 years in Leeds. But it's a bit of a secret. It's a lot of our kind of back of house stuff happens in Leeds. Most of the National Collection lives in Leeds. We've got 500 odd members of staff working in Leeds, but it's a kind of a well kept secret. So we are now trying to do more public programming in the area, just to work a bit harder for people who are our neighbours. So my role is all about developing new learning programs in Leeds, across everything that means. So lots of the work I've been doing so far has been school engagement, kind of setting up our schools program, but also some family engagement. And I really want to do targeted work with kids who might be more difficult to engage with, might be less ready to kind of come and do things with the library. And that led me towards, totally inspired by Blue Cabin, thinking about how we could support care experienced children and young people in the city.
I love it. Definitely a secret. I like that you described it as a secret, because when we were talking, I was like, I didn't know that there was a British Library. I thought you were working in London. We go, no, I'm in Leeds. I was thinking, so is Delyth. Elvie, Delyth mentioned that Leeds is a child-friendly city, and I wondered if you wanted to say something about how that works, because it was fascinating when you were telling us about what that means as an organisation and what that means for you.
Yeah, so being a child-friendly city is a commitment that Leeds City Council made on behalf of the city 10 years ago. So it's their 10th anniversary this year, and it means that they have a plan for children and young people across all services that the council runs and partners that the council works with, to make sure that children and young people are at the heart of everything that they do to make it as child-friendly a city as it can be. As part of that, they invite organisations and individuals to be Child Friendly Leeds ambassadors. So the British Library is a Child Friendly Leeds ambassador. So that means kind of keeping in contact with them, supporting activities and, communications that they do, and looking for opportunities to work together in partnership. It's a really high profile thing in the city. They do big events for children and young people. They provide, like I was just looking the other night at a map they've produced for, kind of with children and young people, for children and young people of the city to kind of navigate around things that are interesting and useful for them. It was a really lovely thing about coming and working in Leeds and just starting to have conversations with people around the city, that everyone was mentioning child-friendly Leeds as being a really good thing, as being a really good connector for me as a new person kind of working in the sector in the city. So very, very quickly was put in touch with a fantastic woman, Jane Kay, who was working at Child Friendly Leeds at the time and had been there, I think, for its whole life, who opened just all sorts of doors actually to projects that we've gone on to do, and was really crucial for us making connections into children and family social work team in the city.
Delyth, you mentioned child friendly Leeds as well, and I wondered how you're using that connection in your work in your School of Education.
Yeah, well, I suppose, to be honest, it's something that I'm still quite learning about. I have talked about in my previous institution in Liverpool, we were looking at what makes a child-friendly city, and Leeds was always put as this great example of what they're doing. Like, we were looking just in terms of space and mapping and how children are part of the city, are part of the urban space. But since I've moved to Leeds and actually meeting Elvie and going to the event the other night, it's just made me realise that I need to make more connections, because I think my students could actually learn a lot about the practices, what Leeds are doing, the commitments they're making to make Leeds a child-friendly city, what that means, and then also what my students can take away from that in their professions, because a lot of my students come from an educational background, pre-primary or primary education. So I think I could actually bring it into my teaching, and it would be really great to get some people who are involved in Leeds being a child-friendly city to come and talk to students as well.
Yeah, the kind of youth voice and influence is really important for child-friendly Leeds. So they were saying, we had an event the other night that they were at, and they were saying they've just refreshed. They have 10 wishes for children and young people in Leeds that kind of drive their strategy. They've just refreshed them as part of their 10th birthday celebrations. I think they said they'd spoken to 80,000 children and young people across the city as part of revising those wishes.
Yeah.
So you can really see that commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we teach in childhood studies, is the importance of putting children at the centre of everything and listening to them. They have a voice, let's listen. And yeah, when they said that at the event the other night, that they'd spoken to 80,000 children and young people, it's just incredible.
It's incredible to see that as a really great example of children's voices being linked directly to policy in a meaningful way rather than a ticky-boxy way.
This is a very short break to remind you that this show is available to listen to on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, and many other platforms. Search Creative Life Story Work wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, back to the show.
Delyth keeps referencing the event that you were at the other night, and I wondered, Elvie, if you would like to speak to it.
I'd love to, absolutely. Definitely the highlight of my week so far, apart from coming on the podcast, of course. So we, one of the projects that Child Friendly Leeds enabled us to do with the social work team is that we have just finished making a recipe book with a group of about 30 unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people from different parts of the world: Chad, Sudan, Iran, Afghanistan, Eritrea and Ethiopia. We work with them to put together a selection of their favourite recipes from home, which we've presented in a beautiful recipe book that we had a launch event for on Wednesday, which Delyth was very welcome as a guest there at that event.
You have to tell us what the recipe book was called.
Oh, it's called Cooked with Love.
Yeah.
That was one of the young people, Ali from Sudan, came up with that title, but it was something really common to all of them actually. So one of the beautiful outcomes of the project is, the social workers say that it was really effective life story work, because it gave the young people that opportunity to reflect on their homes and families and memories in a really positive setting. They've mentioned a few times that most often when they're talking about their lives, it's the worst version of their life stories that they have to keep recounting as part of their process of applying for a refugee status in the UK, and they don't necessarily always have the space and the opportunity to remember the really positive things about their lives and share those really positive things.
And
so that's reflected in the books as well. Absolutely, it's a real celebration of them, their identities, their memories and culture, and the idea of cooked with love sort of came from those conversations. That was, they were talking about their mothers and their families, and the idea of sharing food as being something that was really important across all of their cultures. So yeah, cooked with love.
How gorgeous! And where can people see Cooked with Love, or get a copy of it?
You can download it for free from the British Library website. I don't know if there's a way to share a link in podcast notes or anything like that. If anyone has a pen and wants to write it down, it's bl.uk/food-means-home, which was the original title of the project. Yes, but we're giving hard copies of the book out for free across Leeds. So guests at the launch event got one, but the social services team are going to be giving it out to foster carers and young people who are kind of newly arriving in the city, to help them kind of negotiate cooking and food in their new homes.
Oh, just such a gorgeous project. And Delyth, you went to that event, and I'm just wondering how that transfers into your role at the university with your students, and what does that mean in terms of all policy making or life story work? What does that, because that's a real living example of it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I was just struck by what Elvie said then about it being a form of life story work, and it absolutely is, and how young people are always asked to kind of reflect on those negative parts of their life, and just being at the event, you could see it was a celebration of life story and memory and identity, and it was so incredible to be there. And I actually talked about it. So I was actually teaching a seminar class on the Wednesday, and I was teaching about care experience to my students, and we were talking about care experience globally, and I was saying that care experience is also a mobile experience. Young people coming to the UK who are unaccompanied, who are being separated from family and coming into the care system in the UK. So care experience exists and is experienced in very different ways. And then I was saying, actually, I'm going to an event tonight about young people who have created this recipe book, and the students, I put the link on, so all the students are going to go and look and download the book and cook from it. And we were talking about how, as Elvie just said, that this book is going to be given to foster carers, to children's homes, because when a young person goes into care, they are separated from their identity, from their heritage, and to have something there that's familiar to you from your home is so impactful, it's so important. And we have these discussions all the time about care experienced young people in the UK being separated from who they are. And I think this is just a wonderful example of the little steps that we can take and bring into policy to help a young person feel a sense of belonging and having some connection to their heritage. And I think it's a great example. So I'm definitely going to be bringing it more into my teaching, because, as I said, my students are really interested in care experience, because it's not something that's talked about that much in some of their home countries. And I don't think they've ever really thought about young people in care, which is really interesting, because obviously I talk about it all the time, all day. So to have these examples is just, really, really brilliant.
The other thing that just occurred to me while you were talking, Delyth, just another little reflection, was that some of the young people we work with were really great cooks, and really knew those recipes, how to make the food that they wanted to share. But some of them really couldn't cook. They had left home when they were so young, and had just been eating what they could get their hands on while they'd been traveling. So it was a great opportunity actually for them to learn from one another, like things they remembered eating at home and really enjoying, but didn't know how to make or where to get the ingredients from. They were able to learn that from their peers, and then obviously the book will enable that learning to can be passed on to other young people arriving in Leeds as well.
Absolutely, it's such a legacy, isn't it? And this is something that I just find really fascinating about care experiences, inheritance, and this idea of inheritance. And these young people have created a book and something that other young people will be able to inherit. It's incredible.
And the book will be in the British Library. I find that incredible.
Yeah,
I know, forever.
Forever. I never knew that every book is in the British Library till Elvie told me.
Every single one.
Yeah, and that book,
every single one.
Yeah, that book will be in the British Library. How incredible. I think there needs to be a step back from that. The next project is about, she says, designing your projects, but about growing the ingredients that you need for all of those, for all of those dishes to be made, and linking all the allotment growers in to grow all of that as well. Both nodding. Yes, that would be good.
I'd
really like that.
Like, who wants to fund that? That would be amazing. Absolutely.
Oh, dear me. And also what I'm hearing from both of you talking there is, I keep going back, is the importance of that, not a framework, but the child-friendly Leeds, to hold that so that you as professionals can make those connections with the right social worker, with the right participation worker, with that youth worker, with whoever, with the volunteers who will presumably support that project to thrive. Just inspirational, really, and a shortcut to getting that project up and running.
Yeah, I mean, it was great what Delyth was saying earlier about Liverpool and thinking about becoming a child-friendly city. I would love to see this. I've worked in many different parts of the UK, and this is, I think, the most sort of joined up approach I've seen in any individual city that I've worked in. I would love to see it much more widely adopted.
Yeah, and I'd love to see what the university can do as well. What role that we can play as educators, as, I don't know, connectors. So I think going forward, this is something that I'm quite interested in exploring, is the role that we can have as an institution that's pretty big in Leeds, and also what our students can bring to it as well. Our local students, but also our international students. And yes, I'm looking to, who can I have those conversations with? So
I was at an event in Newcastle where they were naming that sort of a role as community weavers, who are the people, and I think that might be the people who you were at your event are the community weavers, and that they can take that out and weave the stories together, so that it continues, as you were saying, as an inheritance. I wondered if now that Delyth's been to an event of that Elvie hosted, if there were other. You started to talk about it, Delyth, but what other collaborations might there be coming out of the Made with Love project, or just you as institutions in the city, really? I wondered if you'd had any thoughts about that now that you've experienced a marvellous, welcoming event.
Yeah, well, as you know, me and Elvie already had a conversation.
I know.
And I actually learned about the other amazing work that Elvie and the British Library are doing with other groups of young people, including care experienced parents and people and foster carers, around reading and storytelling. And we kind of had a discussion that actually this is something that I think the university would be really, really interested in, and possibly Blue Cabin as well, based on
live on air devising a project. I love it.
thinking about, based on Time Together, the project that we did with Blue Cabin, and looking at storytelling and story time and reading as a family time practice. And this is something that me and Elvie had a bit of a discussion about. And I would, absolutely love to talk about that further as well.
That's really interesting, isn't it? So as it's almost like the in the Venn diagram of that project of you're interested in the gathering and the telling of stories, as is Elvie, but then there is the marvellous the keeper of the stories and the sharer of the stories through the library system. But so you have been cooking up another project. Fantastic.
Yes, this is definitely something that I would like to think further about, and of course Blue Cabin as well, possibly being a part of that.
Wow. Blue Cabin's favourite shape is triangles. We like it when there's three of us to hold something safely together. So I can see that will be. Elvie, did you want to say to talk about the work that you did with those young mums and the Littleys, the reading project that you did?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was something that we did during one of the lockdowns. How many were there? I have no idea now. But once upon a time, when there was a lockdown, we did it was quite a kind of relatively small, kind of short project that we did, aiming to try to provide families with kind of a fun, creative, like weekly thing to take part in, and also support parents and carers to think about children's books and reading with their children. We aimed to kind of work with a cohort of care leavers who were parents of young kids between sort of 2 and 5 years old. We got some young people from that cohort involved, but it was quite a kind of challenge for all sorts of reasons to get them involved. So we opened it out to others, foster families, kinship care families, and others as well. So we had 14 families take part in the end. We took place over 6 weeks in early 2021. We got a wonderful story reader involved called Maddie Coilo, who she runs her own company called Story Bees in West Yorkshire. And the idea was that we would, the reason we went for her, and the reason I called her a story reader rather than a storyteller, excuse me, is that we wanted whatever we did to feel like a very accessible, kind of replicable, I suppose, experience for the carers and parents who were involved. We wanted to kind of show what a joy and delight and what an easy thing it can be to share the love of picture books with very small children. So as it was lockdown, every week we sent out a lovely parcel with a picture book and some kind of craft or play materials, and then the families joined us for a sort of 45-minute-ish online session where Maddie read whatever the book was. We did a little bit of singing and rhyming, as you do, and then did a play or kind of craft activity afterwards. It was lovely.
So lovely. And that idea of receiving a gift through the post or delivered to your door as well with, your craft materials that you need is at the heart of some of the creative life story work sessions that we run, where the boxes are delivered and then they open them every week as well. The idea of a gift, the gift of your recipe book, the gift of those stories, the gift of the students going in and finding it out at the heart of everything. How lovely, lovely. And definitely that would be something that we could learn from at Blue Cabin. Elvie and Delyth, how fantastic. What a brilliant conversation we've had this morning. And I definitely feel that a trip to Leeds from Gateshead is on the way so that we can do some further plotting about how we can best work together. Thank you very much for your time this morning. I'm delighted that you've met in Leeds and looking forward to the time when we can come down and share a cup of tea and a slice of cake together whilst we plot. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Whether you're a foster carer, someone who has experience of the care system, or you work with children and young people, we hope this episode has given you an insight into how we could make Life Story work better for young people. You can find out more about our show at wearebluecabin.com/podcast, and we'd really love to hear your thoughts. You can record and send a direct question or message to the show via the website, or you can tweet us at wearebluecabin. If you'd like to listen to future episodes, remember to subscribe wherever it is you usually get your podcasts. And if you're using Apple Podcasts, please do leave us a review, as it really helps others to find our show. Bye for now.
The theme music on this show is by Madurfan, sourced from Pixabay and used under license. You've been listening to an Anya Media production for Blue Cabin. Find out more at anyamedia.net/podcasts.